enhancing sandwiches with plus-ups, peanut butter with dill pickles, and Nicoise salad on crusty bread. This week, it's all about sandwiches.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel podcast for foodies. Destination Eat Drink is the place for foodies who love to travel and travelers who love to eat. And this week, we're putting all kinds of things between two slices of bread with Barry Enderwick, author of Sandwiches of History. But first, a favor. If you could, please rate and review Destination Eat Drink on your podcast app. It helps more foodie travelers like yourself find the podcast, and thank you very, very much. And for those of you planning a trip to Portugal, I have the Essential Foodie Travel Companion. It's my Portugal ebook, available at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. In it, there's all the best food and drink, including regional specialties from 17 cities in Portugal. Download yours for just $9.99 at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink, and thank you for that. Barry Enderwick became a social media sensation with his Instagram and TikTok channels, Sandwiches of History. He's amassed 700,000 followers who regularly watch him make, taste, and review sandwiches. Now Barry has a book called Sandwiches of History, the Cookbook, all the best and most surprising things people have put between slices of bread. It has recipes going back over 150 years, as well as recent ones that he adds his own twist to and enhances with what Barry calls plus-ups. We talk about why sandwich recipes changed in the 1940s and 50s, and we discuss the age-old question, is a hot dog a sandwich? Plus, Barry tells the story of an odd banana substitute in England. Okay, I'm starving, so let's eat.
Destination Eat Drink.
Barry Enderwick from Sandwiches of History. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink. Can't wait to talk to you about stuff that goes between two slices of bread.
Oh boy, this is going to go long. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. You know, everybody loves sandwiches, but not everyone decides to write a book on sandwiches. Tell me, as we get started here, where does your hoagie-based journey begin?
Well, I've been I wouldn't say lifelong, but since my early 20s, I've been a very curious cook. I like trying new recipes. I like trying eating different things. And I came across this recipe book from 1909 called The Up-to-Date Sandwich Book. And I thought, well, that's, as soon as you publish it, it's no longer up to date, but that's fun. And I just started perusing the recipes in there. And I figured out my friend Adam had sent it to me. And I was perusing the recipes, and I thought it was fascinating to see what folks in 1909 thought was it when it came to sandwiches. I thought it'd be fun to do that on social media. So I started doing that just, again, because I'm curious. And then, most of the sandwiches, some were terrible, some were pretty great, and most were just in the sort of middle zone. And it dawned on me that if I just added an ingredient or two now, it might be something I'd want to make again. So the way I described it is I make sandwiches from old recipes as written, and then plus them up for the modern palate if they have potential. And ultimately that led to writing Sandwiches of History, the cookbook. I went back, I looked at the recipes, I modified them. So a lot of them didn't have measurements for some of the ingredients. A lot of them made like 20 sandwiches. So I went back, adapted them so that they would all make one sandwich, with the exception of maybe two recipes in the book make, a little bit more than that, just because of their nature. But just updated the recipes so that they could be something that people could try today, and would be palatable today, and then also offer up plus-ups and some backgrounds and some condiments that might not be common knowledge.
There's a lot of stuff in there to unpack, and I want to talk about plus-ups in a minute here, but I think the first thing we should talk about is, you mentioned this cookbook from 1909. I've read your book, and you've got sandwiches that are 150 years old, or, well, sandwich recipes that are 150 years old or older. And I'm just curious, as you're doing this research, as you're finding these old these old sandwich recipes, newer, going through the 20th century up until today. Is there anything you noticed in the evolution of sandwiches over time, maybe from a palate perspective, maybe from an ingredient perspective, or just something else that maybe you noticed along the way?
Yeah, it seems to me that sandwiches were at one point considered sort of like more of a tea sandwich or part of a multi-course meal as opposed to a full-on meal. And in the late 1800s, that started to change and become more sandwiches, like with the emergence of the club sandwich out of clubhouses, which is how it got its name. You also see a fair amount of sandwiches that use a protein, but they grind it up and they mix it with a bunch of other stuff. And I think that was to make something that was expensive last longer, go further, if you will. And then you see in the post-World War II recipes from America, things start to get a little zany. You've got this sophisticated club that has like peanut butter, coconut, ham, pineapple. It's just a bunch of tomato, avocado. It's just like, it kind of went nuts. And some of it works. Like that recipe actually does work, which is shocking to me. And then bread is interesting. Most of the time, if a recipe calls for a specific bread, I'll use that. But a lot of times I default to white sandwich bread because that's apparently was the most ubiquitous one, which you wouldn't think. I get a lot of comments where people are like, it would have been an artisan loaf. And it's like, no, it would not have been. It may have been baked at home, but it would not be an artisan loaf. It would be white sandwich bread. That was what everyone ate.
So I think it's fascinating that after World War II, you see this change. I wonder if that has a lot to do with the fact that the food industry changed a lot in the late 40s and the early 50s, allowing for food preservation. So when you see things like pineapple on a sandwich, that pineapple is probably not a fresh pineapple. It's probably a canned pineapple in that context.
Correct. Yeah.
So I wonder if this new wave of food preservation had a lot to do with this explosion of different kinds of sandwiches happening in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I think so. I think preserving stuff in cans like tinned tuna and sardines have been around
Sure.
for a lot longer than that. I think it was they were able to apply it in a mass manufacturing way to fruits and vegetables, and that helped open things up a bit. I also think that trade just sort of opened up more after the Second World War. Like ingredients were a little bit easier to get access to.
Interesting.
Not as wild and wide open as it is today by any stretch of the imagination. But you wouldn't have saw the sophisticated club is not a sandwich you would probably see in 1939.
You mentioned the sandwich with avocado and pineapple, and I think that kind of is an answer to this next question, but maybe you can think of another example. And, because as I'm reading through these recipes, some of them strike me as being more left field than others. And I'm just wondering if you saw any sandwich recipes as you're doing research, because there must be dozens, probably hundreds of recipes that didn't make it into this book. Were there any that you saw that you were like, you're reading it and you're going, this'll never work, but then, or that's way too weird. And then you try it and you're like, hey, what do you know? Avocado and pineapple do work together.
Yeah, the sophisticated club is top of the list. It's the picture that's on the cover of the cookbook. It is bonkers what is in it, and it should not work, but it actually does really nicely. But yeah, there's been a bunch of recipes that were like, wow, this actually works. Something like the Hot Chicken Tuna sandwich from 1974. It sounds like it'd be kind of gross, but it's not unlike a tuna melt. And it actually tasted really good. Now that might be a product, because I'm a product of the 70s, that might be something that appeals to me because of nostalgia. But
it does sound very 70s, doesn't it?
And it is. The origins of it were 70s. But there's like a 1909 from that up-to-date sandwich book. There's a Spanish sandwich, and it's basically sardines and green olives and lemon juice on buttered toast.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, okay, that could be okay. Turns out it's tasty. It's good. You have to like sardines, but it's actually pretty tasty.
one recipe that I saw that when I read it, I was like, I wonder how this works. And we're talking again about World War II and maybe post World War II was the mock banana sandwich. And this one came out of
Oh yeah.
England. Could you
Yeah.
talk about this one a little bit? Because I found it just fascinating, the ingredients that they used and what they were trying to mimic with this.
Yeah, apparently a mashed banana sandwich was something that was enjoyed in England, and just mashed banana between sliced buttered bread. Well, wartime breaks out, kind of hard to transport bananas across the ocean when you've got U-boats everywhere and you've got to focus on a war. So they took parsnips, boiled them, mashed them, added banana essence, which would last on the shelf indefinitely, and a little bit of sugar. And I got to say, the texture becomes almost identical when you mash it up to banana. It's not exactly the same, but it is. If it was wartime and that's all you could get, you would be very, very happy. And it's interesting to try it now because, who thinks mashed up parsnip is a good substitute for banana? Yet they knew to smash up something that would have a similar texture, then flavor it properly.
It's amazing, and I
Yeah.
imagine people during World War II just eating this and being like, "Hey man, this is pretty
Yeah.
great right now. We're suffering,
Yeah.
but at least we've got something that tastes good."
Right, exactly.
Let's step into it right now, Barry. This is the
Oh, boy.
age-old debate, and I talk about this on the podcast sometimes. I love a good food fight, and this is a good food fight.
I think I know where we're going.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. So, how you talk about this in your book, and
Mhm.
people have been debating this over beers and family dinners for years. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
My personal opinion is that it is, and I'll give two reasons why, and then a little caveat at the end. So the first reason why I think it is because everything is made up. The entire category of sandwiches is made up. It's named for one guy who did not invent sandwiches. Like, there's no way he was the only person to have ever asked for meat between bread. So everything's made up. If you want it to be a sandwich, it is. The second, more logic-driven one is if you take a look at the hot dog bun, it's of equal thickness approximately on two sides, and then a very thin hinge. So much like a sub sandwich from like Jersey Mike's or something like that, it's hinged. And the reason is you want to accommodate the filling. So the hinge is there in the hot dog bun to accommodate the tubular meat. And therefore, technically, a hot dog is a sandwich. Now, here's the caveat. If someone says, "Hey, you want a sandwich?" and you say yes, and they hand you a hot dog, there's going to be a disconnect because people don't think in terms of it being that way. So I fully recognize that. But I'm saying, I think technically it does qualify as a sandwich. It's the same with hamburger. People somehow are thinking that hamburgers are not a sandwich, and it's like it's meat and filling between two pieces of bread. Like, that's even more of a sandwich than a hot dog, if you will. But to me, hot dog, sandwich.
You talked about the so-called invention of the sandwich, the guy, the fourth Earl of Sandwich in the 18th century,
Yeah.
and I think you make a great point. Well, I probably think it's a great point because I agree with it, and because I've also made a similar point, which is, I think what you're saying is food is more evolutionary than revolutionary, and by that I mean
Yep.
it's always building on top of, and it's sandwiches, so we're building on top of things. And sandwiches are a great example. The Earl of Sandwich was not the first guy to put meat between two slices of bread. And the example that I always use, now I'm going to steal yours, but the example I always use is pizza. Like, it wasn't the guys in Naples who first thought of putting tomato sauce on bread and putting cheese on it. This came from other places. They just happened to codify it in a way that we now say, okay, that's what this thing is. So
Right.
I love that I've got another example in my pocket when I'm making this argument about the evolution of food.
Yeah, no, sandwiches, I came across a recipe that's reportedly originated around 200 BC in China,
Oh,
the rose jumeau, right? And if you look at it, it's stewed meat, typically made with pork belly today. It was originally supposedly made with beef. And it's a lot of warm spices because it was on the Silk Road trade route where spices were being trafficked. And you cook the meat, you get it nice and tender, you shred it, you put it back in with the juices a little bit. Then you put it into a griddle cake that's split almost all the way through. And if you take a look at the picture, It looks like a sandwich, right? I mean, it is pretty much a sandwich. It's just they didn't cut it, the thing. If you just cut the griddle cake all the way through, it would qualify as a Earl of Sandwich. And that was 200 BC. So to me, if that's going on, then there's in the Jewish tradition, there's Hillel the Elder, who had like bread, lamb, and a bitter herb, and made a sandwich from that. So I don't know. I think. I find it hard to believe that the Earl of Sandwich, John Montague, didn't just happen to be great at the right time, at the right place at the right time to get his name on it.
I think you and I came up about the same time. I always remember that, and I won't say the exact name of the sketch because it's kind of gross, but there is a hilarious Saturday Night Live sketch from I think 1980 that has the Earl of Sandwich in it. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up on YouTube. It's foul, but it's hilarious. And you as the sandwich guy, you need to watch it. It's pretty funny.
I can't believe I don't know that one.
Oh, good. I'm glad maybe I turned you on to this. But
yeah, that's awesome.
But it's not suitable for families, just so you know.
Got it. Yeah, got it.
Do you, Barry, do you have a personal like go-to sandwich where you're at home and you're like, all right, let's make XYZ?
I would say like I don't eat a lot of sandwiches outside of Sandwiches of History because I eat one a day at least. So there are certain default sandwiches I have in my repertoire. One is peanut butter and dill pickle sandwich. I grew up eating them. I love them. They're oddly enough, I thought my brother had created it or something like that, but no, they're in the cookbooks back to the early 1900s. There's recipes for peanut butter and dill pickle sandwiches.
Really?
So it's been around for a long time. It's an easy, quick, interesting contrast, and you can zhuzh it up if you want with a little sriracha and cilantro. Take it into more of a Thai sort of thing. But that one's one. The tomato from Turkey and the Wolf, I've made several times. It's a mind-blowing sandwich. And I'm not vegetarian, but it is vegetarian, and it is fantastic. I would highly recommend everyone try that at least once.
You can make amazing vegetarian sandwiches. You had one in your book, and I guess this one's not really vegetarian because it has tuna and anchovy, but you could adapt it easily to make it vegetarian, called the pan bagnat. Bagnat.
But yeah, it's French, so and it's a pretty particular dialect of French. So I don't know if it's 100% correct, but I think it's pan bagnat.
I saw this. I just thought it would be so great vegetarian with all these cool vegetables in it and stuff. But go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically a Nicoise salad in between crusty bread. And you're right. You could make that vegetarian and it would be fantastic. Basically, you make this salad of a bunch of different vegetables and you make a dressing, and then you put on top, you can put in tuna and you put in anchovy fillets. You wrap it really tightly and you weigh it down in the fridge overnight because you make this in a crusty bread. And what happens is the dressing from the salad soaks into the bread, and it doesn't sog out because you've got a good crusty bread. So when you bite into it, you've got this crunch, and then you've got this soft bread, and then you've got all these different flavors that have been marinating overnight, and it is fantastic. But yeah, totally easy to adapt that into a vegetarian sandwich. Just leave out the tuna and the anchovies, although I do recommend that.
Well, we're here in Portugal and they love their anchovies here. So anchovies and sardines, super, super popular. Yep. I live in a city that historically and I was interviewed on the radio this morning and I was talking about it then. Our whole waterfront was lined with fish processing warehouses and factories for hundreds of years. And this was what the economy of this city was completely. It was the men would go out on the fishing boats. They still do to this day. And they would come back and they would bring them and they would get processed in these canneries. And that was where all the women worked. That was basically the wives' jobs and the young women's jobs. And this is what it was like for hundreds of years. But now you come to Portugal and canned fish is a huge thing, a huge part of the of the culture and the diet here.
Yeah, I understand it's that way in Spain as well.
Yeah.
But especially so in Portugal. But yeah, and they've got some fantastic, like the canned seafood we have here is good. it works. But the canned seafood from Portugal must be off the charts.
It's a completely different animal,
Yeah,
so to speak.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
well, Barry, you mentioned bread, and you mentioned that you normally use white sandwich bread. I'm wondering because
Mhm.
you talk about some different breads in your book, and
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, is it possible or is it even conceivable to pair sandwiches with bread? Is there a time when you go, you know what, this bread is not going to work with this sandwich? I have to do this. Obviously, there's things like hoagie rules and things like that. But do you think about that? Is that something that's in your brain when you're coming up with these sandwiches?
Well, typically no, because I'm following a recipe, right? And so
Mhm.
if it specifies what bread to use, I'll use that, and if it doesn't, I'll default to the one that was most ubiquitous. But I do think it matters. I think the texture matters, and that's one of the many great things about sandwiches is, yes, you can modify the filling, you can mash up different cuisines within the bread, within the sandwich. But the other thing is you can change out the bread. What kind of bread is it? A hard roll, soft roll? Is it toast? Does it have caraway seeds? Does it have salt? So it's like the seeded rye works so great with corned beef that I can't imagine having it with any other kind of bread, right? But if the recipe doesn't call for that, I'm not going to just put in seeded rye because I want it. So yeah, I think bread can bread can definitely make a difference in the flavor of a sandwich for sure.
You mentioned a mashup of styles and cultures, and I'm really fascinated with this. This is the idea of transplanted cuisine, an
Mhm.
ingredient or a dish moving from one culture to another. And I'm especially interested in it right now in Portugal because we're starting to see some breaking in to traditional Portuguese cuisine of some different cuisines. Like there are two uh, Nepali restaurants that have opened up in our city, and we're just a city of 100,000 people that have opened up within the last
Oh,
year here. And,
cool.
there's Indian, of course, there's a Bangladeshi restaurant just opened here. So there's all kinds of
Yeah,
interesting things that are going on. And I'm fascinated with what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. Are some of these
yeah,
ingredients going to make their way into traditional Portuguese dishes like
yeah,
Brazilian dishes already kind of have here.
yeah, yeah.
There's a stew called feijoada, which is basically a bean
Oh, I
stew.
love that.
So good.
Yeah, that is so good.
And here in Portugal,
Uh,
every Sunday is called feijoada day because everyone has feijoada on Sundays. So I'm just wondering if these other
Amazing.
cultures are gonna come in. I
Oh,
say that
absolutely.
I say that long-winded explanation to ask you, can you think of
Yeah.
examples where cultures have been mashed together between two slices of bread?
Uh, not in these old recipes, but you can see it like, um, for example, one of the things I do on Sandwiches of History is Sandwiches of Our History, and I try to capture recipes that are being done within families that aren't necessarily in a cookbook. So my grandma made this, my dad made this, and this one person wrote in says his grandma made this, and it was peanut butter, fried egg, chili flakes.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, well, we can take elements that's got elements of Thai cuisine. Let's
Hmm.
go ahead and add a little sriracha. Let's add some cilantro. Let's try
Brilliant.
that out. And it was fantastic. And so that's the kind of thing I think we're going to see more of now. And I think if you go to a sandwich shop that's, more than just a sandwich shop, you'll see experimentations like that where there are overlapping cuisines. There's a fair amount of overlap, for example, between Mexican cuisine and Indian cuisine as far as the spices that are used.
Mm.
So they can influence each other easily. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that where there are overlaps. You're going to see that first.
You mentioned sandwich shops, so I'm curious. Do you have a favorite sandwich shop? You're from the Bay Area. Do you have one that you'd like to give a shout out to? It doesn't have to be from the Bay Area, but I know that's where you're from.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, like I said, I don't eat a lot of sandwiches outside of Sandwiches of History, but I will give a shout out to Lee's Sandwiches, that's based in Northern California, as they are largely responsible for popularizing banh mi in the United States.
Wow. Okay.
They came over as refugees, opened, like, I think they had a food truck in LA. Then they opened, the brothers opened a shop in San Jose, did some catering for a while, and then started selling banh mi sandwiches and just went from there. But they're largely credited with bringing the banh mi to popular American culture.
We were just in Belgium, and there was a banh mi shop in, I think it was in Ghent, Belgium,
Yeah,
of all places. I was
that's
like,
awesome.
wow. But then you think about it and you think, oh, okay, well, there is a strong French influence in Belgium, in a lot of Belgium.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
France and Vietnam obviously have a history. So,
Yeah.
you might expect to see it in France, not so much in Belgium, but I was very pleased to see a banh mi shop in Belgium.
Another interesting thing about the banh mi is that the bread that's used originally, baguettes were being baked because the French were occupying Vietnam. But wheat imports became problematic, and the local bakers figured out they could use rice flour in combination with wheat. And that's what, when you get a banh mi, it's really it's kind of crispy outside and really thin and fluffy inside, but not really dense. That's because of the combination of flours that they use,
Yeah.
which came about from necessity.
So good. Oh man, so good. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it right now. Yeah, Barry, you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier
I
when we
don't
were
blame you. Me too.
you mentioned earlier when we were talking about something you called plus ups, and I have to admit, I had never heard. I mean, I could kind of figure out from the context what plus ups meant, but I never heard it before. I looked it up on the internet, and it said what it was. But can you talk about plus ups a little bit? And is that a common saying in the sandwich world, or is that something you just decide to latch onto?
No, that's something I decided to latch onto. And it's one of those things where, like, people have asked me, like, hey, you say let's give the sandwich a go. Did you plan on that? And it's like, no, this is just something I said. And then I just kept saying it. And the same with plus it up. I want to add something. That's just something I came up with to indicate that I wanted to make it a little bit better. I know for a fact I did not come up with the term plus up. It's not a commonly used term. But for example, I found out, I think last year, that Disney used to tell his engineers to plus up ideas.
Oh, okay.
So, like, I had no idea that that was the case. But so I'm not the first person to use it. I'm probably the first person to use it with regards to making a sandwich. But yeah, the idea is to just, can you add an ingredient or two from today that would make a sandwich from, say, 1932 something we'd want to eat again, eat now.
And how do you decide on the plus ups? It seems to me from reading your book and from talking to you for a little while now that you really put some thought into the cuisine that you're getting this originally from, and things that might match well with that particular cuisine and come from that culinary tradition.
Well, yeah, usually what happens is I'll read a recipe and I'll be like, oh, it'd be good with this. So I'll write down what I think the plus up will be. But I look to have complementary or contrasting flavors, textures. I do look within the cuisine that it's coming from, but I also look to other cuisines. Is there something I can bring in from Thai? Is there something I can bring in from the UK that would be interesting, like HP sauce, and that would actually help the sandwich be more something I'd want to eat today. So I try to think in terms of what's going to make this stand out a little more, but work with the original flavors and not alter the sandwich to the point where it's completely different. Like, I don't add meat to sandwiches that don't have meat, because suddenly that sandwich becomes a chicken and whatever that sandwich was, as opposed to the focus of the sandwich. So I try to avoid that, just because, even though, man, bacon could plus up just about every sandwich.
Okay.
I have to be judicious about using it at all, because obviously it could work with any sandwich, but it definitely could plus up any vegetarian sandwich, which kind of defeats the point of having a vegetarian sandwich.
Sure. Although there are vegetarian bacons out there, and I have to say the fake vegetarian meat has gotten so much better over the last 10 years or so that really tasty.
And it's kind of hit or miss. Like, I haven't had a really great fake bacon yet, but the spicy Italian sausage from Beyond Meat, I think is fantastic. I love it. So it's trial and error. It's a little bit of experiment, but yeah, it's so much better than it used to be.
Speaking of Italian sausage, it's funny you say, because I just made a vegan Italian sausage in my air fryer, and I'm going to, as soon as I hang up from you, Barry, I'm going to have it. And it's made with tempeh and lots of fennel, obviously, and some
yes,
red pepper flakes and some other spices in there. A little star anise is in there.
All right.
And
what are you going to do with it? That's what else are you going to do with it?
So it's nice and spicy by itself. So it needs to have something a little more neutral going with it. So usually I'll put it on a bed of rice, and and just go with it that way. I got this this recipe from this guy Derek Sano, who's an American. He's living in England right now, but he does some really interesting not only sandwiches but other recipes too. And you may find him interesting. I think you guys are kind of have a similar thought process, so you might like it.
Okay, I'll look him up. That sounds interesting.
Well, I recommend folks follow you on social media, but I especially recommend folks pick up Sandwiches of History. I read it all in one day because I was so fascinated by it. Now I got to really start digging in and making some of these recipes. Folks can get you at enderwick.com, and I will have a link, of course, in the show notes so that they can come and get that for themselves.
Better yet, sandwichesofhistory.com.
Oh, okay. Better yet, sandwichesofhistory.com, and we'll have links to all of that stuff in the show notes. So, Barry Enderwick, thank you so much for being on Destination Eat Drink. This has been a fun journey into sandwiches. Maybe we'll do it another time.
That sounds good to me. Thank you for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, there you go. I really like how Barry dug deep to find all these recipes, and his mind is open to tackling all these flavors, stuff you might say, I don't know, but turn out great. Love that. Like he said, you can get Barry's book at sandwichesofhistory.com. There's so much more in the book that we just didn't have time for. It's really great. And if you want more of our conversation, Barry and I talked about unusual flavors of potato chips from around the world and craft beer. I mean, what goes better with your sandwich than some chips and beer? You can hear the whole conversation as a member of my Substack at destinationeatdrink.substack.com. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week, we're enjoying Coffee in Colombia, a coffee drink in Milan that's only available in summer, and the coffee fight between Aussies and Kiwis. Don't miss that. Until then, get over to destinationeatdrink.com, where I've just posted a bunch of new foodie travel content. There's a new video. It's about a chocolate crawl in Bruges, Belgium. You know, they make some of the best chocolate in the world in Belgium, and Bruges has some amazing chocolate shops where I sample a bunch of delicious treats. I know, tough job, right? You can see that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com or by going to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@destinationeatdrink946. There's also a bunch of foodie travel guides for you to read. If you're thinking of a trip to Portugal in 2025, I've got a complete foodie travel guide to 17 cities in Portugal, including Lisbon and Porto, as well as many other lesser known but must visit places. It's over 600 pages, and it's just $9.99 at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. I've also got foodie travel guides to individual cities in Portugal and Spain, including Seville and San Sebastian. Check those out, and I'm sure they'll whet your travel appetite. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson, and I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.